Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Denise Steward from Learning Grove, the Senior Director of Equity and Donor Relations. I thank you for joining me today to talk about how everyone can get started on a journey for creating an organizational culture that is equitable. I'm an early childhood educator, and I've always worked for nonprofit organizations. 8 years ago, the program I was with, called Visions, merged with Children Inc. upon the retirement of our executive director. Um, at that point, Visions became the first Ohio program for Children Inc., and I became the first African American person to join the leadership team of the agency. Also, at that time, 4 board members from Visions decided to join the Children Inc. board, and one of those 4 became the first African American board member for Children Inc. The following year, the Dominican Sisters of Hope, who had long been a funder of Visions, decided to give one more large donation to the agency because the sisters needed to dissolve their foundation. Part of that process was a site visit. They visited with me and my staff at Visions, and then they made a visit to our CEO and several of the board members at the central office. When the report came back, they decided that they were going to give us the last final grant, but they expressed some serious concerns about the lack of diversity within the agency, on the agency's leadership team, and also on the board of directors. When that information was presented to our board of directors, they went to work immediately, and by the end of that year, had elected 4 additional African American members to their board of directors. However, for a long time, nothing much changed at the agency leadership level. Fast forward to 2018. By then, Children Inc. has 4 Cincinnati locations, and we have a new CEO, Shannon Starkey Taylor. One thing that she did early in her position as CEO was to arrange for our leadership staff to have a training on institutional racism. There were a few members of our team who didn't believe that it was necessary, but Shannon moved forward, and we held a 2-session training on institutional racism. At the end of the second session, our consultant provided us with a list of recommendations for us to move forward so we could become an equitable organization. At that point, Shannon realized that someone needed to devote their time to this work because everyone else has so much on their plate already. She asked me to step away from the direct services of the agency to lead this equity work, and hence my position began in January of 2019. I spent that first year trying to connect with other organizations within the city who were involved in equity work, including the United Way. And I also discovered the All in Cincinnati Equity Coalition that's sponsored by the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Later that year, I also attended the groundwater training, a presentation by a group called Racial Equity Institute, who has provided this training through the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. That was an eye opener. I also attended the follow up training, a 2-day series called the Phase 1 training. And I met some people that I was going to be working with later on at that Phase 1 training. Later in the year of 2019, Cincinnati Early Learning Centers and Children Inc. began having conversations about the possibility of joining forces so that we could have greater impact on the children and families in our region. Later that year, our boards decided that that would be a wonderful idea, and the 2 organizations merged to become Learning Grove. Officially, we became Learning Grove in January of 2020. We began the work of integrating the two organizations. I continued our work on equity, and I had a small steering committee that was working with me to look at the policies and procedures that we knew needed to be changed. Then, of course, everybody experienced the pandemic in the middle of March of 2020. All of our programs had to shut down. After a short period of time, two of our child care centers, one in Covington, one in Cincinnati, reopened to provide pandemic child care. We had to find other ways to connect with our other families, and we did that virtually. We also connected with our staff members all across Learning Grove virtually through all staff chats via Zoom. I led two sessions on the NAEYC's position statement on advancing equity in early childhood education. I got a great response to those two discussions that we had. And after the second meeting, I reached out to the Learning Grove staff as a whole to say, I need to develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force because one person cannot possibly complete all the work that needs to be done. And I needed to listen to different ideas from all across the agency. 23 Learning Grove staff members stepped up to the plate and said that they wanted to join the movement. And so our diversity and equity and inclusion task force began. We also have a Learning Grove board member who participates regularly and also a volunteer who was actually retired CFO from Cincinnati Early Learning Centers. And so the work began. Okay. What I hope that you will gain from me today was learn just how to get started. Your organization wants to become an equitable organization, how to get started. Looking at demographics, connecting with the groups that you serve. Learn how to have those difficult but necessary conversations that address racism, implicit biases, and how those things impact interactions with staff and clients. Talk about white privilege and working with clients. And then finally, after looking at all of those things, how to develop a plan of action that engages everyone in the organization, from staff members to board members, and also some input even from your clients and the communities that you're serving. So, how to get started? One thing you need to remember is your direction is more important than your speed. I tell the members of the task force all the time, the title of this presentation is not a sprint, it's a marathon. You're not going to complete one workshop, one training, one seminar, and you learn everything that you need to know to get started. Everybody has to be in it for the long haul. Prepare to be working for several months, even several years to get to the place that you want to be. But before you start, you have to find out, where are you now? Look at your current demographics of your staff, your clients served, and then look at your demographics by position. Are the leadership team, are the leaders of your organization all of one cultural and racial background? What about your staff? Are all those positions filled by members of a certain racial or cultural group? Same thing with your board members. Do all of these things, your staff, your leadership, your board membership, do they reflect the population that you're serving? You have to look at all those things. And if there are some disparities, you have to develop a plan to address those. Also, you need to have conversations with employees in the agency from all levels. What do they think about the organizational culture? Is it equitable? Is it oppressive in some ways? Find out what they're thinking and then really listen to what they're saying and figure out what you need to do. Also, look at the vendors that you're currently using. Everybody has to purchase supplies, purchase food, purchase services. How many of the vendors that you're currently using are minority owned businesses? Take a look at all of those things and then start thinking about where do we want to be. After that, you have to educate yourself. Like I said, I spent the year of 2019 educating myself, learning about what information is out there in the community, who else is involved in this work, what really is equity. You know, a lot of people mistakenly think that equity and equality are the same thing, but they're very different. Equity, when true racial equity exists, you will not be able to predict outcomes based on race or culture. Um, then we have to, uh, another way to get educated is to complete the groundwater training. If you have not done so, I highly advise you, encourage you to enroll in that class the next time the Greater Cincinnati Foundation offers it. They have graciously provided it for the last several years free of charge because they've been able to get corporate sponsors to fund this work. You can read and discuss books. For a time, White Fragility was at the top of the bestsellers list. There was a time when it was difficult to find a copy of it. Our leadership, executive and senior leadership at Learning Grove, read and discussed that book together last year. And we created spaces for us to have those difficult conversations about what white fragility was, things about white supremacy, racism, all those things that are difficult to talk about, difficult but necessary. Right now, we're reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. That's written by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. And we will be finishing that in the next couple of months, and then we'll move on to the next one because there's so much to learn about racial equity and racial inequities and racism. Utilize consultants for training. There are quite a few wonderful consultants right here locally who can help guide your staff through some much needed conversations. They can tailor the training to the needs of your particular staff. There are TED Talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial equity. And Google can be your best friend. One thing I'd like to say here is that please do not rely on your minority employees, fellow employees, co-workers, to be the go-to um, sources of your information. Educate yourself. We, as members of minority groups in this nation, are experts on the experiences of racism and racial inequities, but you yourselves need to do your own research and come up with your own information. Have those difficult conversations. And no one really likes to talk about racism, and they really don't like to talk about institutional racism. People's defenses go up when you start mentioning those things. Start off with something like implicit biases. Those automatic thoughts that we have that we're not even aware that we have those ideas and attitudes towards people of different um, social groups or racial groups. We all have them. I have them. There's some that I've noticed myself and I've had to address. I'll share one with you that I had 35 years ago when my executive director told me that we were going to move our child care center from over the Rhine to Price Hill. Think back, I thought about that. I have a mostly Black staff, not all Black, but mostly Black staff. Most of our children are Black, but you want us to move to Price Hill, which was at that time mostly white. And my implicit bias kicked in when I started remembering those conversations with members of my family, my parents, my grandparents, my uncles, about what they thought about Price Hill. One thing that I heard was that people would sit on their porches with shotguns waiting to shoot a Black person who walked down the street. And so I was terrified that we were going to have to go and work in a neighborhood that I felt was going to be really harmful and dangerous for me and for my staff members. So I said to my executive director, I'm going to need some help with that. And so she provided me some help. She sent someone to talk to me who was the director of a community center in Lower Price Hill. And he met with me and my staff and he said, okay, Denise, maybe at some point in time, those ideas might have been valid about this community. But let me tell you about this community today. It's full of hardworking people who want to raise their children in the best environment, prepare them to be their best selves. They're hardworking people. They are going to be more concerned about how well you care for their children, how well you prepare them to be successful in kindergarten, than they are about the color of your skin. And then he said, trust me. So I said, okay. Well, we made that move up to Price Hill, and guess what? He was right. We were accepted just for what we had planned to do for those children and those families. And I'm happy to say that that helped me to get over that bias that I had about a whole section of Cincinnati. So, but just think, we all have them. And it's because of the families we grow up in, the attitudes and the values that our families develop in us, the the um, the friends that we surround ourselves with, the schools that we attend, the neighborhoods we grow up in, all those have an impact on our ideas, and we don't realize that we have them until something triggers. Another conversation that's necessary is to have is, are you going to be not racist? Say I'm not a racist, or are you going to become an anti-racist? Right here is where I'd like to share a video with you that talks about this very thing.
So I have a question for you. Are you non or are you anti? Several months ago, in response to Ferguson, Baltimore, the killings of Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice, my friend Caitlin put up a Facebook post breaking down the difference between non-racism and anti-racism. Most of us are non-racist. Because racism is looked upon as some moral lapse, we feel quite self-assured that it's simply not being racist. I'm not a bigot. I don't sing that N-worm when my favorite rap jam comes on. I didn't vote for that guy. I'm not burning any crosses. I'm not a skinhead. I don't, I won't, I'm not, I've never, I can't. What you end up with is an entire moral stance, an entire code for living your life and dealing with all the injustice in the world by not doing a damn thing. That's the great thing about none. You can pull it off by simply rolling over in your bed and going to sleep. So why are you sitting at home and watching things unfold on TV instead of doing something about it? Because you're a non-racist, not an anti-racist. Now do this for me. Take the C out of racist and replace it with a P. I'm not a rapist. I'm not friends with any rapist. I didn't buy that rapist last album. All these things that you're not doing. Meanwhile, people are still getting raped and black boys are being killed. It's not enough that you don't do these things. You're going to bed with a clear conscience. It's not going to stop college students from getting assaulted. You thinking climate change is terrible is not going to stop climate change. You being so assured that you're not anti-black, anti-Muslim won't stop the next hate crime. And it's wonderful that you recognize how brave gay people are when facing persecution, but they aren't the ones who need to be brave. We need to get active. We need to hold people accountable. We need to accept that what hurts one of us hurts all of us. And we need to stop thinking that injustice going on in the world isn't to an extent our fault. We need to stop being non and start being anti.
Racism is a business. For centuries, it has underpinned.
Okay. Another difficult conversation to have is institutional or systemic racism. One thing that I learned when I participated in the groundwater training and also the phase one training that followed that is that racism is something that's embedded into every institution in our country. It's embedded in the groundwater, if you will. And it's something that makes people feel uncomfortable. But when you think about 400 years ago, what happened in these United States, what happened when Europeans first came to this continent, what happened to the indigenous people who were already here, what happened in 1619 when the first slave ship arrived here from Africa, and think about all the things that took place to um, create a racial hierarchy that put white people on the top, black people all the way on the bottom, and anyone who was non-white and European somewhere below the white Europeans. So it's embedded in all of our systems. It's embedded in our education system, our housing system, our justice system, our healthcare system, everything that you can think of. Um, People don't like to talk about it because they say, well, those things happened years ago. We have civil rights laws that were passed in the 1960s. There was affirmative action and all of those things. We elected a black president in 2008. All that is true, but still racism remains. Why? Because there is power and authority that's associated with it. And before those systems can be changed, we have to think about ways to dismantle some of that power that has kept that system in place and has helped it to change with each generation. So it looks a little bit different, but still it has the same impact. I think that last year was a year for us to really come to grips with some of those racial disparities that exist within our country, from the pandemic and the lack of access and the extreme impact of coronavirus on communities of color, to the racial unrest that erupted after George Floyd was murdered in front of lots of people by the Minneapolis police. And people, there was a somewhat of a reckoning, but people still try to say, well, I'm not that, just like the Marlon James in that video that I just shared said, I'm not a racist. I didn't do that. I don't engage in that. I have white friends. But still, racism exists in all of our institutions, all of our systems, and it still creates these disparities that have just come to the forefront because we're all in another crisis, a national crisis. Another thing that people don't like to talk about is the whole issue of white privilege. People become defensive as soon as you use that term and give you responses like, I'm not privileged. I didn't grow up rich. I grew up poor. My family had to struggle. Sometimes we were homeless. Sometimes we didn't have enough to eat. But white privilege doesn't have anything to do with your economic status. It has to do with the fact of it's totally with the advantages that are given to you because of the color of your skin. White skin in the United States is a quote the default color. White people are the default race, if you will. Everybody else is different, and because we're different, we're treated differently. White privilege is not having to be followed by a security in a department store because they want to make sure that you're not going to be a shoplifter, or not having to worry when you get pulled over by a police officer um, that you're going to be harmed, that you're going to be able to just get your ticket and be able to go home with no physical harm. Um, Believe me, trust me, as a Black woman, all of my years, I have witnessed racial profiling. I've witnessed my husband experience it twice when I was with him. So we've had to have that talk with our son, especially, but with all of our children about how to respond, what to say, how to act when you get pulled over by the police. And I'm sure that's something that most white families have not had to do with their own children. So that is the privilege that we refer to when we use the term white privilege. And then there's a whole topic of reverse racism. And I'm here to say that there is no such thing. Racism is a system that requires power and authority. Um, in the United States, the power and authority belong to white people, but more importantly, white men. And so Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people do not have that authority to make you suffer because you are a different race. So um, we need to address that too. And also what it means to become an ally. And so there are lots of TED Talks, there are lots of videos, there are lots of articles written about what it means to be an ally in the struggle. We saw some of that happen during the civil rights movement. We saw that happen in a lot of the demonstrations that took place last year when people were coming together to protest racial injustice inflicted by the police and other institutions. Um, an ally doesn't mean that you necessarily have to lead the charge, but it does mean that you want to work side by side with everyone who's trying to tear down dismantle these systems that continue racial divides, that continue racial injustices, and that tend to keep us separated. Come and work with us to try to dismantle these systems that keep us separated and keep people from achieving, keep everyone from achieving what they have the right to achieve. Okay, so become an ally. After that, you've educated yourself, you've had those difficult conversations, then you start to make a plan. Sometimes it means you want to come together and develop a position statement. This is what our organization stands for. This is what we stand against. And you want to share it with people. But first of all, for your plan, you've got to determine where you need to start. You got to determine what diversity metrics are going to work for your organization. We all know the business case for diversity in the workplace. The more diverse the workplace, the more good ideas are generated, the more business you're able to do, the better you're perceived by the general public. Okay. But you have to make a decision about what makes sense for you. Suppose 60% of the clients that you serve are members of minority groups. What is a percentage of the staff members that you have? Is it something similar to that? Do you want it to be something similar to the metrics of the percentages of the um, clientele that you're serving? What makes sense for you? The same thing with your leadership and your board membership. Do they reflect the communities that you're serving? What about your supply chain management? What percentage of businesses that you do with are minority owned? You have to come together and decide what makes sense for your organization. It's not a one size fits all. It's what makes sense for your organization and how you want to appear to the general public. Then what you have to do is you have to form a committee. Like I said before, one person cannot do all of this work alone. You gather a committee or a task force or whatever you want to call to actually do the work. Reach out to people all across your organization. Think about those conversations that you have with your employees. Who is really interested in engaging in this work? who has identified some things that need to be corrected. Involve those people in helping you develop your plan. Carefully examine your HR policies and procedures to make sure that they're equitable. Is there something that in the way a policy is written that prevents certain people from moving into positions, like minimum education requirements or experience requirements? Take a hard look at those policies and procedures to make sure that you are not inadvertently um, keep holding some people back from being able to move forward. And what things do you have in place for your staff to be able to move forward, to be promoted? Is there a plan in place for training to obtain the skills that are needed to move to execute higher level positions within your agency? If you want to increase diversity, sometimes you have to seek new recruitment sources. I participated in a diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion that was sponsored by the Claremont County Chamber of Commerce last year. And there was someone on the line who said that, gave an excuse for not having a more diverse staff at her location. She said that Claremont County is 95% white. I cannot find qualified Black or other minority applicants for my positions. So I've heard this excuse being made before, and so I felt compelled to respond, to which I said, people cross county lines and state lines every day to go to work. You need to start looking outside of your county lines to find minority employees. Enough said. That's all I said. But that's what we have to do as well. And sometimes it means going beyond our city limits to reach out to some of the historically Black colleges and universities. Or if we want to do business with other minority groups, there are several local chambers of commerce. There's an African American Chamber of Commerce. There's an Hispanic American Chamber of Commerce. There's an Indian American Chamber of Commerce. And there is an Asian American Chamber of Commerce. Reach out to them. Find out the companies that are members of their groups and seek them out to try to see if you can make some contracts with those minority-owned businesses. And then you have to develop a time frame for your plan. Don't make it 6 months. Don't make it a year. Right now, we're working on a plan that's 3 years out. Do I believe that we will have achieved everything that's in the plan by 3 years? Probably not, but we will make some progress because we have a plan. We're committed to working on it diligently to make sure that we get to where we want to be. After you have your plan, you have to get to work. You convene your committees. Our DEI task force at Learning Grove meets monthly. We've divided our work into 5 different subcommittees that look at certain different aspects of our agency's operations, and find people to work on those committees who have a real interest in whatever area that the committee is going to address. And be sure to include staff from all levels of your organization. If you want everyone to buy into what you put in place, you need to include more than just your leadership. Include your line staff who are in constant contact with your clients every day. It's so important. And that's why I'm proud of the task force that we have at Learning Grove, because we have representation from all levels of our organizational structure. Put your training into action. You've gone to workshops, you've listened to TED Talks, you've read books, you've had consultants who come in and given you information. Put that stuff into action. Um, one step at a time. It's one conversation at a time, one policy at a time. But after taking one step, having one conversation, looking at one policy, after a while, you keep doing that and you look at how you can look back at how far you come. You have to decide to become an anti-racist. Becoming an anti-racist requires action. Not enough to make your statement, publish your statement. You have to put the work into it to put your money where your mouth is. If you just make the statements and don't engage in the work, then you're going to look a little bit hypocritical to everybody around you. Then you have to share your message. Okay? Share the message of what you're doing. Share it internally so that all staff understand what you're doing to make things better for everyone. Share it with your board of directors. Share it with the community that you're working in. Share it with the clients of your agency, the families of the children that you're working with. Let everyone know this is who we are, this is where we stand, this is what we're doing to make our agency, our organization, the type of place that we want people to be proud to be a part of. After you've been working for a while, you have to celebrate your accomplishments. You're not finished yet, but periodically just look back at what you've done. Look where we started and look where we are right now. Celebrate those accomplishments. But then you have to dig deeper. I found that the more work that I do, the more committee work that's completed, the more we find that needs to be done. It's like peeling back the skin of the onion. You've peeled away this. Okay, we've taken care of that. But now look at this. We need to address that also. Just be prepared that that's what it's going to take. But that's why I keep saying it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You got to be prepared to hang in for the long haul. You have to take a look at accountability. You're going to develop some desired outcomes, going to establish your timeline. You're going to decide who's responsible for doing what, for completing what tasks. And then you have to establish the expectations of your agency staff and also of your board members for this work that you're doing. And just remember, we are all responsible for the work of creating a culture of racial equity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion must be woven into all operations, policies, and procedures of the organization. And then we must practice what we preach. I want to thank you all for your commitment to engaging in this work. It takes all of us, not just a couple of us, and it takes all of us working together and being committed to working for the long haul. I just want to leave this quote, one of my favorite quotes by the late Congressman John Lewis. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Thank you. And now I hope you've put some questions in the chat so we can go ahead and get to that. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? If you have some questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, I see. How do you propose getting started with measuring where you are now? One thing, the first thing that I did was look at the current demographics of Learning Grove. I looked at every staff member, by every position, and by every location that they worked at. We have 17 different childcare sites on both sides of the Ohio River, and we also have other programs, home visiting, a career counseling program for high school students. We have after school programs. So we looked there. And then we looked at the demographics of all the clients that we serve, and we compared the demographics. Okay. So that's where we got started. And we decided that um, the, the demographics of our staff were not what we wanted them to be compared when we compared them to the clients that we were serving. And definitely, especially in our leadership level, the leadership of our um, agency was not a good representation of our staff as a whole. We had a lot more minority staff members than we had on our leadership team. So we decided that we needed to do some work on that. And I have to say, we um, we have made some progress. Thank you for that question. I'm curious to find out if anybody feels like implicit bias plays a part in the operations of their organization. I know that we had a whole training on implicit bias and what it is, how it shows up, and it made us start really thinking deeply within ourselves about what do we need to do about this. We need to address them and then move forward from them. Just have more open minds. More questions? Well, I've included a lot of the resources that I use for our work at Learning Grove at the end of this PowerPoint. You can access them through. Okay, okay. Here's another question. I think implicit bias shows up in where we recruit employees and offer services to clients in underserved communities. I believe so. And thank you for bringing that up, Carol. A danger that a lot of nonprofit organizations find themselves exposed to is that the idea that because we're a nonprofit, we're doing a lot of good. We're doing a lot of good that helps poor people. Um, and so, because we're doing things to help people move out of poverty, we can't possibly be racist. But you have to take a step back from that. You just remember what the gentleman said in the video, that it's not enough to say, well, I don't have those ideas, I don't share those views, but you have to do something to work harder to eradicate those systems that continue um, racial discrimination, that applaud and make it okay to for racial segregation to continue, and so on. Got another question. That someone who lives in Oxford and said that they're having difficulty um, reaching out to It's a small community having a difficult time trying to diversify the board and committees and suggestions. I have to say to you, like I said to the person from Claremont County, maybe you have to step outside of Oxford, and because Cincinnati is not that far away, we're just one county away. But also look at your CBUs. There is Central State University is not that far away from where Oxford is located. Um, Look at the University of Cincinnati. Okay. Um, just to come and work. Just reach out to other organizations. The Urban League of Southwest Ohio might be able to help you to find some other people. I just saw another question about someone said that they had some volunteers, but they had to ask them to step away. Can you tell me about the issues that made you have to ask the volunteers to step away? Was it because of their attitudes or things that they said or did that didn't resonate with your organization? I know that the volunteers need to go through a vetting process also, just similar to what we do with employees, just to find out their ideas about different things and about their experiences working with um, diverse groups of people. Um, More questions? We have a couple more minutes. Okay, got 5 more minutes. Well, once again, I'd like to thank everyone. If anyone would like to have more conversations with me, you can feel free to reach out to me through my email and we can set up a conversation. Um, I, I'm excited about some things that we have going because we are a child and family serving organization. We've developed something called Teachers Learning Circles, where we're trying to equip our teachers to be able to have those conversations with the children in their classrooms about race and racism and help them to develop their attitudes about people of other colors as not being superior or inferior. We're all created the same and we can all work together. But this Teachers Learning Circle has been going on for 5 months. And it started off with we have a small group of teachers that are well seasoned teachers who engage in best practices in their classrooms all the time. And even they had a difficult time knowing where to begin to have these discussions with children, let alone amongst each other. And so we created a safe space for them to talk with one another. And now they are coming up with resources for introducing these concepts to the young children in their classrooms, starting with some books. We've even had some discussions about the Dr. Seuss books and why they're probably not the most appropriate books to have in our classroom libraries because of some of Dr. Seuss's racist portrayals of Asian people and African people in some of his books. Um, so we're helping to live out the ideas that were stated in the NAEYC's position statement on advancing equity in early childhood education. We as early childhood educators have a responsibility to not share racist attitudes and ideas with our young children and to put them on the path to be able to understand what it means to be accepting of everyone that you come into contact with, regardless of their color or their language or their cultural background. Now, about 1 minute left. Any more questions before we go? Once again, I'd like to thank you for joining in this discussion. It's good to know that other people are interested in doing this work. But like again, I said, if you would like some more information, I'll be happy to share some of the other work that we've done at Learning Grove and that we're continuing to do, because we all have to join in this work together. Thank you very much.